have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Here's to Gracearchy. I got to get this cup positioned right. There we go. Sponsored by the Zero Aggression Project. Zap the state. Have a nice day. Don't you wish that Dave Smith actually was a libertarian?
Oh, I think he is very much a libertarian. And we just got through doing a libertarian purity episode, and I would definitely score him in that chart, on the Nolan chart. I would put him in the libertarian
he gets into the top. I mean, he says that he does, but Jim, I don't have enough experience here, and I want to take this debate thing apart and sort of understand why that's true.
Yeah, that's what we're here to talk about today, is this recent debate he had at the Soho Forum, put on by, sponsored by Reason. They do these debates, and they're kind of supposed to be Oxford-style debates, and Dave Smith debated Alex Nowrasteh on immigration. Alex is lesser known, maybe, to a lot of people, because Dave Starr is really rocketing right now.
Yeah.
Post the Doug Murray debate, which we talked about in the previous Joe Rogan episode we did.
Yep.
And he was very much right then. He was very much on the right side. And he's also very much right on the right side on a whole host of other issues where he's getting an opportunity to come out and speak. And I definitely would put him in the libertarian quadrant. But he was not taking the libertarian position, just full stop.
Yeah, right. That confused me. I mean, and so I would say he's more of a pragmatic libertarian. He's like, okay, we have these libertarian values, and we're at some other place now. How do we move toward those libertarian values in a reasonable way? I respect that.
Well, and so we could steel man the argument right up front. We can say that there are a group of people who believe that it is impossible to have a libertarian society if we are continuously bringing in new people who are uninitiated to that idea. That is the nicest thing that we could say about that position.
Yeah.
And I think it's it's based on a fear, which is why a lot of people embrace statism, is fear. Yep. So it's based on a fear. And so let's get into the details on this here.
Oh, yeah. Later on, I'm going to come back to that point, because I think it's so important that we educate popular America to have a better perspective on this. Okay, so let's get into it. Oxford-style debates begins with a resolution. And so The resolution against which both Dave and Alex are measuring their skills is this. I'll read read it word for word so you have it here. Government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. Government restrictions on the immigration of a peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. Okay, so that was the starting moment.
Yeah, so government restrictions on who?
Peaceful and healthy people.
Yeah, so I thought it was kind of interesting that got thrown in, right? So I could actually imagine that, as they're sitting down discussing or debating how they're going to write the proposition to bring these two guests in to settle everything, Alex was pulling for these two words to be introduced. I just want to say they don't need to be there, and you'll see why.
Right.
Read the end of it again.
So government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people makes sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America.
So especially in present-day America is something that Dave's side would have asked for, because they want to try to say, well, we don't have to be libertarians on this issue now, as I just explained, because it will forestall the day at which we can bring about libertarianism. So you see how even at the very beginning, the proposition has some failures.
Yes.
Now, I want you to, this is going to be a difficult exercise. I want you to try to read this back to me, eliminating these two clauses that I just identified. One's Alex clause and the other is Dave's.
So it would be simple. Government restrictions on immigration makes sense from a libertarian standpoint.
There's the debate to be had.
Yes.
Okay. There's the debate to be had.
How much should government pull the levers?
And I'll skip to the end. What do they call it when they give away the plot?
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
So there's a spoiler alert for you. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. Dave does not actually argue for a libertarian position in this debate. That's that is what happens.
That shocked me too.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying he's not a libertarian. I'm not saying that I'm not really thrilled that his star is rocketing right now. He is getting lots of new media opportunities. He has become a much bigger celebrity in 2025 than he was in previous years. And I think that's good on balance. But on this particular issue, he does not argue. So let's get right into it.
Yeah.
Dave makes 4 points in his opening statement. 4. He talks about, he gives a definition of voluntaryism, which is ironic. That's the most important point we're going to discuss today. So he argues that he is advancing voluntaryism. He makes a point about Ellis Island. He talks about the role of private property, and he throws out a hypothetical about a mass immigration moment. So let's break each one of these 4 things down, okay? First, he has a very strange doublespeak definition of voluntaryism. And it's summed up in the idea, do Americans have more of a claim over their country than everyone else in the world? Now that seems like, oh yeah, of course, Americans have more claim over their own country than everyone else in the world, but everyone else in the world is coming here, and Dave is suggesting that they are going to change something about it. They're not Americans changing America. And then he does something really, really, really interesting to me. And I can't believe that anybody fell for this. It's so stunning to me. So he goes on to define libertarianism as basically being voluntaryism. The idea that we want to use voluntary action and persuasion with one another. Now, it's not a bad definition of libertarianism. It's kind of roughly explaining how we work more than it's explaining what it is.
Yeah.
But then he does something really interesting. He suggests that if you oppose immigration, you don't want these people coming here. Their presence here force an association upon you that is not voluntary. Then he suggests, I am not making a democratic argument, but polls show Donald Trump was elected because. So he proceeds to make 2 democratic arguments right after saying, I'm not making a democratic argument, I'm a voluntarist. And he will hold fast to this throughout the debate, as if he has somehow or other defined libertarianism.
Yes, based on the popular opinion of Americans.
Okay, so I'm going to do a better job right now than he did, and I just want to knock this down. This is the most important thing he said. It's also the beginning of a slippery slope into a mess. So it's really important to understand this point. First, there are what are called limited government libertarians. They feel that they are basically constitutional conservatives in some cases, although they used that language more 30 years ago when I was first introduced to libertarianism than they do today. But Harry Brown, who I ended up working for in 2000 when he campaigned for president, suggested the idea of being able to put the the government inside the Constitution, which meant it was dramatically downsized. Okay? There are 2 things that precede that type of thinking. There's the Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal. So in a public space, we all have the same access and abilities and movements and all the rest of it. And then 2, this way of thinking doesn't actually advocate for democracy. It advocates for a republic. Now, in a republic, there are certain liberties that are guaranteed to the individual, and they go to the individual, and the individual needs to be protected from the state. The individual is the key unit here. And this, what Dave's presenting, doesn't even rise to the level of Republican. And I mean that in a small r sense.
Yeah.
Now, voluntarist means yet something more. Voluntarist means that the individual unit matters so much that the state can't ever encroach on it unless it finds that it is somehow or other harmed another one of the individual units out there, another person. The person matters. But that is not the definition of voluntarism. The definition of voluntarism is I get to make my own choices, or you get to make your own choices, so long as they don't hurt anyone else. And I get to choose all my relationships, including the ones that govern me. Meaning I didn't sign the social contract. I don't even, this government I may even think doesn't represent me. It is what a lot of people would call an anarchist position. I'm not comfortable with that term because it puts bad ideas in people's heads about people in small spectacles and turtlenecks running around bombing things. But it is essentially the position of no state. So he was arguing for a state. This is inherent to his view. If you're going to enforce immigration laws, you have to have a state. Okay. Now, I want to illustrate this with...
There's the presumption that we need in immigration laws in this too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. If you have immigration laws, then what laws do, someone has to enforce those laws.
Yeah.
And what we have to do that right now is a state. And he kept saying that this is living in reality, but it's not living in the proposition of the debate,
yes,
which was that we were talking about what libertarians want.
Yes.
And he wasn't aspirational at all. He was anti-aspirational in what he was suggesting here. Now, I'm going to make a major confession right now. I said in the Libertarian Purity episode that I am not for, that I'm for open borders, or that is the libertarian position.
It is.
I now regret that. Okay. I had a twinge when I was talking that I wasn't quite right, but I didn't know how to articulate it at the time. And I'm grateful for a variety of reasons in the last several days, including watching Dave. I have a clearer sense now of what the problem with that position is. And that is that there is this consistent thing. We talk about human respect here, right? There's this consistent failing on the part of people who hold this view. And we'll get into their view deeper in a moment. There's a consistent failing on their part to recognize the humanity of the individuals involved.
Do you mean the open border position or the...
On their border position. They start with Dave's school of thought starts with is property rights.
Yes.
Property rights. So property rights trump everything. And we discussed how people are fighting over guns, right? One side says, no, you don't have a right to a gun. The other says, no, I do have a right to a gun. And the other side, and the libertarian position goes, wait a minute, there's a human being here that wants to be able to defend themselves.
Yes.
And so when we start talking about the border bill, and I'm sorry, I was wrong in the last episode. I just want to clarify and correct what I said in the Libertarian Purity episode. It's not open border. The border is not the issue. Every time we're talking about the border, we're making a mistake. We're talking about the free movement of human beings made in the image of God, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. That's what we're talking about. Free persons. Okay. So, So his second argument, and I actually got to give him credit for this one. I actually loved this argument. This was my favorite argument he made all night. He said that Ellis Island is not libertarian. And on a purist basis, he's right. He talked about, if you recall, he talked about the restrictions that occur, how you're going to be stopped, you're going to be stripped and searched, they're going to look under your eyelids. He talked about you're going to be detained there for multiple hours, if not days, while they investigate you and determine whether or not you're allowed entry into the country. And he even went so far as to call it, like totalitarian or Stalin-esque. But from a libertarian position, that's 100% right. Like if voluntarist, he's saying he's a voluntarist, that is not the voluntarist position. I cringe a little bit when people propose this. Now, Chase Oliver was running for president. He talked about having a modern day Ellis Island. And Alex Nowrasteh wanted that little tweak about healthy, and what was the other term? Healthy
and peaceful.
So he wanted that in there because that allows for some Ellis Island to occur. He wasn't going to argue the full Monty in the debate because he was going to take a more limited government position. But why? Why? Well, because it would be better than what we have now. So directionally,
he's a pragmatist on this Ellis Island issue as well.
Well, so directionally, it's more libertarian than banning them altogether, which is a point that Dave ran straight past.
Right.
It's directionally better. It's significantly better directionally. It's a concession to the fact that we do have to operate in a system. Here's a moment where Alex is actually living in reality, even by Dave's definition. But you know what? I don't, at the end of the day, I don't understand why any libertarian would argue for Ellis Island. You already know that the government does badly, everything that it does. Why do you suddenly think that they're going to be good at managing the border? That has not made sense to me for quite some time.
We'll get back to that too, because bless his heart, he confesses to a situation where his approach doesn't work. And the public school is overrun by people who don't speak the way he does and stuff like that. So
yeah, go ahead, do that right now.
Oh, well, so the last thing that he tells is a story. Dave tells us a story about the school, probably a border town in Texas. He wasn't too specific about that, but in a community where he has deep roots and 40 years or 4 generations of paying taxes, I forget which one he said, to build the schools and establish the infrastructure that exists there in that local community, only to find that thanks to immigration, the government school now has majority of people who do not speak English in it, and who are benefiting from the infrastructure that his ancestors helped build. And he has a problem with that. And the problem that he has is a property problem. He doesn't see the human side, as you were just pointing out. He doesn't see that there are people who want to be in America, who want to assimilate into our culture, who want the opportunities that exist here, and of their own free or voluntary will have decided to come to America, regardless of the risk, to enjoy these things that America built for anyone who comes to America to enjoy.
Yeah.
And by the way, they were also peaceful and healthy. He complains about the trauma of having to get here, but we know how to deal with trauma. I don't see that's a problem.
So this actually segues nicely into the third point that he actually raised. I'm glad that you brought this up. So he's basically suggesting that public spaces are collective private property.
This makes the hair on my neck rise.
This is not a new thing. So in 2015, I think it was, I will provide the link in the show notes. I wrote an article for another organization, Students for Liberty. We ended up republishing it a couple of years later at the Zero Aggression Project because they rebuilt their website and the article went away. But it was called "I Want Lew Rockwell to be a Libertarian on Immigration." And there was a premise inside that we Americans own the streets. We own the sidewalks. We own all of these throughways. And
all
we
the stuff
can decide
that we bought with our taxes.
Right. We can decide who goes on those things or doesn't go on those things. Now, leaving aside that is a dangerous or slippery slope, let's take the argument that he's making right there. It's the best illustration he gave all night. Happened near the end of the debate of the argument that he's attempting to make. You picked up on the best one. Government property is public, and here's the key thing. We are equal before the law. Now, government shouldn't be in the property business. In fact, it is a weird thing to say, if you think about it, that government has property. Government doesn't have property. It has spaces that it basically dominates, that it is basically stolen from the Commonwealth, from the people themselves.
Okay? Through the process of taxation.
Right. So they've now got this space and they've created it, or they manage it and they dominate it. And in fact, they treat all of our private property like it all belongs to them too. Okay. But it's almost like a weird thing to say that like private property is somewhat redundant. Property is property, right? Someone owns it. But here in this particular case, by virtue of the fact that the state owns it, really no one does, right? Like you can't dispose of it. Your own property, you can dispose of. You can do whatever you want. You could sit on it. You could sell it. You can't do any of that with the state. There's nothing, you could burn it down if you wanted. You can't do any of that with this common property. And the second...
That's so weird because we own it.
Right.
So if
we don't, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's almost like in this ether of like,
it's like we paid for it, but it isn't ours.
So there's a problem when we start talking with the word we, because now we're moving into abstract land, right? And we're taking away all agency in the process. There is no actual human being that actually can say, oh, this is mine. I'm the final decider. I get to determine this happens with this thing. Okay. And so that's how property works. And this is where, people go down this slippery slope because property has boundaries. It doesn't have borders. Governments need a border, and they basically have agreed to a border. On this side, we shear our sheep, and on that side, you shear your sheep. That's what the real purpose of a border is. It's a difference in the laws and the political construct and the taxation rules that go on either side of that line. Okay. And I don't want the end of borders necessarily, because I don't want a totalitarian state next door or a socialist state next door being able to set the rules. I don't want them fighting over my territory, and I have to figure out which one I have to obey today, because the respective mafias can't make up their mind who really has control of that territory, right?
Yeah.
So I don't, if I get in my ideal world, we wouldn't need borders, but again, we're not there yet. So, the more I can move that line, the better. But the other thing I want to say about this line is that once inside of it now, we're all equal before the law. So there's a simple answer to Dave's school. Roads are for drivings and school is for kids. Okay. Now the state shouldn't be in those businesses. In a voluntarist position, which is what he said he was advocating at the beginning, the government wouldn't make the roads and own the roads and run the roads. And all of this is very easily explainable. This question comes up all the time, but it's actually eminently easy to answer. We have so much to go through today. You're going to have to tune into another one of my episodes where I do this. But then Schools. Again, I don't think the state should be in the schooling business at all. Full stop.
Well, I mean, there's the building, and then there's what's happening in the building, and definitely the government needs to be out of what's happening in the building.
Yes. Well, they shouldn't even be making the buildings. And
Yeah,
this
well,
is where we get
we're
into
stuck
trouble
with those right now.
because as soon as they put their money into something, they say that we own it. It's the golden rule of politics. He who has the gold makes the rules. In this case, the state has confiscated our gold and spent it in the way it saw fit to provide us back something we would have purchased on our own, frankly. Okay. And then, this is a question I asked Lou Rockwell when I wrote the response column, because I was responding to a speech he had given. I said, does a man in Cincinnati with only the deed to his house have the right to stop traffic in Phoenix checking for citizenship papers? Think about the logic of this. I went on to write, how else, other than through the state, can you assume control over property 1,000 miles away from you? So the fact of the matter is the border is pretty big. It's huge. And the bigger it is, the more state you need to protect yourself from the people coming across it. So the real libertarian analysis at the end of the day would say that the schools aren't really for the kids. They're owned by the government. If we really cared about the kids, this is, again, what we keep doing is we keep arguing about the object and then we forget the persons. If the number one priority was educating children, and Dave himself would recognize this, we wouldn't even have those schools. We would be focused on a system that was kid-centered. The way those systems are designed, they are politically centered. They are politically managed.
Yeah.
And people who have the highest level of interest leverage that for their own benefit, whether it's the textbook manufacturers, the teachers union, or whatever. It's about almost anything else other than the kids. And by the way, I'm not impugning teachers here. Most public school teachers know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
They know that there's a bureaucracy downtown away from their district. They know that they have all these Department of Education rules. They know that they are really hamstrung in their ability to really reach and teach those kids, and that they themselves are treated like children. They're not given the liberty to move and really meet those kids where they at. They also know, by the way, some of them, not all of them, that the number one thing that would improve a child's success would be parental involvement. And there's something off. When the system is quote unquote free, parental involvement actually declines. The people that show up at PTA night are the parents whose kids are doing the best in the classes. The ones whose are doing the worst, their parents don't show up. So everybody kind of understands. Yes, everybody understands this, right? Yes. Like even inside the system, the only people that don't get it are the ones that are profiting off of it the most.
Look at our scores. American kids are not anywhere near the top anymore. We've focused on graduation rates. I'm getting off the ball here, but we focus on graduation rates rather than actually teaching people to do anything. And so you get high school graduates who can't read.
We have to start with the person. Everything here is about the person, not a border, not culture. Those are inanimate objects. So if your obsession is about culture, if your obsession is about borders, that's not the libertarian position, which brings us to his last point. He thought was a shocking hypothetical. Do you remember what it was?
Jeez. 500 million Indian citizens decide to immigrate to America.
Talk about an episode of Fear Factor, right?
Yeah.
What he's trying to do is scare you with a hypothetical that isn't even remotely plausible. But let's drag the number down. Let's say there's 100,000 of them coming a month, because that's a much more realistic number to believe.
Yeah.
Would we be worse off? If you think about the number of people who've won Nobel Prizes, created new companies, invented new biomedical products, and on it goes. If we had a mass migration from Asia.
Oh my gosh, when has that ever happened before?
But it would actually be to our benefit.
And look at it now. Look at all the Vietnamese people who came here as refugees and who are now an important part of our economy.
Right. So this doesn't scare me off. And it didn't scare Alex Nowrasteh off. Now, what did Alex have to say? Alex had 3 points that he made, but he took a very long time and started speaking as fast as he possibly could to get them all in on point 3, which I think was a strategic mistake on his part. First, libertarian first principles require free movement of people. So you need a government to restrict peaceful voluntary exchange, because otherwise it's going to happen naturally, right? But they do this all the time. So they are preventing you from using your property and association as you see fit. Dave's wrong that the association question is that we take a vote and then we decide we're going to exclude certain people. That's a very pernicious thing. It's got a lot of bad applications. Like if I decide, for example, I don't like people who have guns. And if they're carrying a gun, I don't want them associating. In fact, we should be able to ban that, right? Well, Dave wouldn't go for that. But of course, that's a logical extension of what he was advocating.
Well, neither Alex nor Dave mentioned the TSA, which is a huge restriction on free movement.
Yeah, in the sense that it sets its own kind of border, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's borders at every airport now.
No, well, I mean, I think that kind of, it's an interesting thing. I think that kind of goes along with Dave's Ellis Island point. I mean, yes. I think the proper, and by the way, Alex would call for the removal of those things, but yes, we're closer to that than we are to the free movement of people.
We are.
So, second, immigration is beneficial to Americans. And he pointed out that immigrants pay more in taxes than they consume, or at best they break even, depending on what study you're looking at. It's across the board a fact. They're less likely to commit crime or be incarcerated than the native-born population, proportionally speaking. And it's a pretty significant amount, by the way. The illegal is a little worse than the legal in this sense, but both groups do better. The legal immigrants are far more law-abiding than the American-born citizens, if you take them as a whole. He admitted that some immigrants use the welfare system, but the libertarian response is to eliminate or downsize the welfare system, to turn this over, if you're a voluntarist, to voluntary compassion. Sure. And works and good deeds and good works and people, working together to make their communities better.
I'll give you an example. We've been talking about this forever, but California, which has sanctuary cities and, virtually open borders because San Diego and Tijuana are sister cities and people work in both. This model helps California be a net donor to the federal government, whereas the Texas model helps Texas to be a net taker from the federal government. So California gives more money to the federal government than Texas does. Texas takes more money from the federal government than they give.
Okay, you said that, and I'm sorry. Please forgive me for what I'm about to say to you. You said that in the way a good liberal Democrat would speak.
I have to.
Can I fix it?
Yeah, no, fix it, because what I want to do here is show the good liberal Democrats that there's a fix that is actually beneficial to everybody.
There you go. Texas is a welfare queen. The state of Texas is a welfare queen. And what they're doing is they're getting the largesse of taxes, and the state of California, in this particular example, is paying for it. Mm-hmm. So it's not fair. So what should happen is that California shouldn't have to pay as much as Texas does because Texas has demanded more government. In other words, this right-wing philosophy infiltrating libertarianism on issues like borders increase the size of the state. Ergo, they are not truly libertarian. And they are definitely not, Dave, voluntarists. I'm sorry, they're just not.
Yeah.
Okay, so this led, this discussion, though, by Alex about how immigration is beneficial to Americans led to what I find to be his favorite line. I'm going to steal this and try to remember to use it every time I get a chance. We need to build a wall around the welfare state. That's where the wall needs to be built. And in fact, we should build a wall around all government spending until it goes away, until it starves and there's no more. It should be under siege. But we should not be building walls around people or to prevent people from being able to move. His third point is the one that he spent the most time talking about, and that is that immigration restrictions are the way tyranny comes to the United States.
That's a difficult one to understand.
Well, and that was partially because he didn't explain it. What he did is started racing faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, which does have the intended benefit of demonstrating that the case is overwhelming. So this is a little thing, behind the screens, inside baseball type of insight here. This is what Alex does for a living. So I want you to think in this debate, because debate is kind of a combative thing, that he's basically the Bruce Lee of immigration. He's got kind of a kit of just defense moves and attack moves that are just really precise and fast and good. Alex knows everything about this subject. He knows it inside and out. He's forgotten more about this subject than Dave knows. Dave's kind of the cool kid in school that showed up, kind of winged it because he's been traveling a lot, in fairness to him. He wasn't fully prepared. So he decided, I'm going to kind of wing out this new definition of voluntarism. And I'm going to see if I can ride that for the night, because I was just somewhere the night before and I was on a podcast the day before that. And I was traveling to this comedy show the day before, because he is very much in demand at the moment. So, he showed up to the debate and did the best he could. But he's kind of like somebody who, maybe took some high school wrestling one year in comparison to Alex.
Yeah.
So Alex can't help himself. He's got all this stuff running through his head and he feeds the audience like a fire hose and they just don't get it. Okay. It's just too much. And it's too much for us all to cover here. Can we just simply accept that two things are true? One, there are tons of information that show that the real problem is white progressives wanting welfare programs, wanting to impose or change culture. Can we just blame the right people instead of the immigrants? And two, can we acknowledge, and this is the part that he really raced through, is that there are lots of abuses that are reductions of the rights of human beings going on here in this process. He talked about ICE. May I see your papers, please? E-Verify. He said eventually that's going to come to be used on guns. He said, mark my word, gulags for green card holders, people cut off from their homes, families, and even tortured for nothing. There's going to be eminent domain. There's eminent domain to build the wall. There's deportations that require taxpayers to pay union officers to deport them. And reductions in ABA. He went through a whole bunch of things. But just understand, the simple facts are that, number one, if you want to deport somebody, I like to facetiously say it should be white progressives. Just send them packing, right? That's fine. Okay. You can also send these leading white conservatives. I don't care. But they are white people of the establishment that need to go. And sorry, because these people who are coming into the country, who are just looking for greater opportunity, they didn't seed any of these policies. They didn't write any of these bills. They didn't adjudicate any of it. They didn't enforce any of it. They are not the least bit to blame for the situation in which we find ourselves right now. Want to know what's happening? Look at Americans. Look in the mirror.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. That mirror is very cloudy.
Yeah. So Dave's rebuttal. And I want to close. I just want to give them each Dave 2 and Alex just 3 points before we wrap up here. And they're real quick. Dave kept comparing immigration to having a gun pointed at Americans.
Yeah.
He reversed the force thing. He basically said, well, you're forcing these people to associate. They don't want immigrants, according to the polls. His argument was entirely, despite his refusals, democratic in nature. It didn't rise even to the level of republicanism. And he kept reasserting to this point, but it certainly wasn't voluntarism. And then we could start to think about the pragmatic exceptions. He wanted us to say, well, there's room for pragmatism. We live in reality. There are certain times, and you identified this earlier. He literally started saying there's certain situations, maybe they're too much. They're too much emergency. And we're having this money stolen from us. So shouldn't the government at least do something right with the money they're stealing from us? Well, no, they should stop stealing the money from us. That's the real problem.
That's the real problem.
But let's pretend he's right. Again, let's just do what Alex suggested. What if we subsidize lockdowns and vaccine mandates?
Wait a minute. Didn't we do that?
Yeah, it's exactly what we did. And you know who was one of the most outspoken people and started to make his claim to fame within the libertarian movement on these issues?
Does his name begin with a D?
Yes, it was Dave. And you know what? He deserves to be applauded and congratulated for that. He is an able debater. This was not a debate he won objectively. I don't care what the audience voted. He didn't actually argue the proposition. But I watched him debate Como. I can't think of his first name. The guy that was on CNN. It's not Andrew, it's his brother.
Yeah.
He debated him, and I watched that entire debate, and he cleaned his clock. And he was able to do it because he had been arguing from principle from the very beginning. Unlike this immigration debate, where he was arguing from a form of property-based pragmatism. Maybe a desire to not associate with a certain type of people, pragmatism. But when he's on, he's on. There's several times I've watched his performance where I'm like, I'm glad he was there. I'm glad he's our voice. But the libertarian position was Alex Nowrasteh's.
Yeah. Dave missed libertarianism and voluntarism right from the start.
Yes.
He ceded the whole thing to Alex on that.
So Alex is going to keep reasserting that immigration restrictions require a bigger, more intrusive state, and they're going to have to use increasingly horrific means to achieve their ends. He also points out that Dave confuses state power with personal rights. In other words, he's getting the dynamic flipped. States don't have rights.
Yep.
Okay. And this is, by the way, this has been a problem all along. You know, part of what has infected what is sometimes called anarcho-capitalism, which is the school of thought that I think Dave and his allies come from. I mean, at least they believe themselves to, because what they're arguing is neither anarcho nor really capitalist, but it's definitely not anarcho. Is kind of this, the South was right on the Civil War stuff. And I don't know whether what his stance is on this, because I've never heard him actually articulate it.
Alex or David?
Dave. Okay. I've never heard Dave articulate this, okay? But I know a lot of the people in kind of his camp have spent time talking about this in the past. And they will use the phrase states' rights. States don't have rights.
Right.
States are an abstraction.
Property.
First off, states are an abstraction. They're an inanimate thing. There are people working for the state who have goals and objectives and choose to comply and go along and participate in carrying out what is being enacted in that club or that group, but it is not an entity. It's not a person. There's no moral sentience there. The moral sentience belongs to individual units called persons. So, you know, in order to load somebody onto a train and ship them off to a camp, people have to do that. States don't do that. People do that. They choose to participate. They accept a check in return for doing the work, right? So there's nothing, that's the problem with states. And then rights. We've had a lot of discussions about rights and even on the last episode. But states can't have rights because they're not persons. Rights are the things that the government, under this limited constitutionalist perspective, is designed to protect. That's why it's a republic. You can't vote away my rights. It doesn't matter how many people you get together. So when I first joined the libertarian movement, there was the Advocates for Self-Government had a speech in a can that you could go give to college.
I remember that. I got a copy. I wish I still had it. I got a copy of that, Jim. Back in the day.
I gave it. I actually did this. I went to a community college and spoke to a government class. And it's a very engaging topic. How many people do you need percentage-wise? What's the vote percentage we need to agree that it's okay to load people on cars and ship them to camps? Is it 50%? Is it a simple majority? In fact, you could win an election with a plurality, but let's just pretend it starts with majority. Well, of course, nobody agrees with that premise. Okay, well, what if we got it to 60% or 2/3? What if we got it to 80%? We had a super majority, right? Everybody goes, no, you can't do that, because of course, morality is more important than legality.
Yes.
And that's the point. And to stand up and make an argument that is essentially legality is more important than morality, which is what Dave did.
Yes.
Is just, it's not libertarian. It's definitely not voluntarist. But Alex went on and he made another point that I'd never thought of before. He said, immigrants are wanted in capitalism. The voluntary interaction that people do proves it. They eat their food. They go to shows about their culture. They even marry the immigrants. And so by that vote, which is much more important than the one where we spend our time dividing into two camps and fighting each other all the time in a giant conflict machine, is actually more telling. When we're testing it by voluntary means and by sacrifice of my own hard dollars or my personal choices in time, overwhelmingly, Americans want immigrants. Overwhelmingly, they want them. It's
Why
only
didn't Alex make
this
a point? I mean, he had data. He could have riffed on this and just won the whole thing.
You think this was his most important point?
Absolutely. I mean, he had a chance to persuade. He has a worldwide stage to do it. Libertarian is all about ideas and persuasion, and instead they just went at it.
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's a valid point. I'd have to think about it, but I think my inclination is to agree with you.
Well, I mean, we've done shows on immigrants and what matters and all of that, but there's data. I mean, we could have gone into the data.
Yeah, I think I wish he would have been able to figure out, and it's hard on the fly. It's real easy to be, the armchair Monday morning quarterback, right?
I know. Yeah, I know.
But I wish he could have figured out which points were the most important and not made all the points. Like that, I think that's actually something that's more powerful. And by the way, full confession, I do this all the time. And then later, when we turn off the camera, I say, gosh, that ran longer than I thought it was going to, and I'm talking a mile a minute to squeeze things in. You're seeing me do it now. So I'm like the guy who lives in a glass house. If I say this about Alex, I'm the guy living in a glass house throwing stones at his house, which is also made of glass. Okay.
But on this point, I mean, Dave was making the whole thing. He was just serving up softballs. And Alex, I'll be specific about this. Dave was serving up the softball that says, the popular American doesn't want immigration, after having gotten there through a sort of dubious logical means. But if that's what Dave was serving up, Americans, by and large, don't want immigration. That was how Trump was elected. Alex's point is to just hit that thing out of the park.
I'm going to say something harsh. I don't want these people who are kind of in this anarcho-capitalist camp who have agreed that immigration is one of the things that they would like the government to play a bigger role in, and maybe even some other parts of culture, as I've been able to talk to them one-on-one and find out they want government involved in those things.
Oh, sure.
I don't want them to start calling themselves voluntarists. I hate the idea. I loathe it. It bothers me because to me, and I've said this so many times, I'm going to say it again, the pastor and the pornographer ought to be able to sit down right next to each other and get along. That's what a libertarian meeting looked like when I first joined the party. And voluntary interaction says, you're going to make choices, I'm going to make choices. They're not necessarily going to be the same aesthetic things. They're not going to necessarily be the same personal values.
Right.
But we are not going to coerce one another. We're not going to use aggressive force to take away that choice from the other person. We've got a bargain that we're all going to go live free. And we're going to figure this stuff out for ourselves. So, Bill, I might think what you're doing is really wrong. I may think that's terrible morally. I could never do what you do. But you're not harming anybody. You're not picking my pocket or breaking my leg, as Thomas Jefferson said. And so you go worship how you want. You go live in private how you want. You go do the things that you want to do, as long as you don't harm me and the people I love. Materially.
Yes.
And that's what that's what the libertarian position is. That's what it should be consistently down the line. I want to throw in one more Alex argument, because this argument started to, I think, become popular recently, but it's something that intuitively jumped out at me more than a decade ago. It just seems so obvious to me. And it is a perfect analogy, and it proves that the arguments that are being made about the dangers of people coming into our country are fallacious. And that is children. I don't know if you've noticed these. They are completely dependent. They are lazy in most cases. They don't contribute anything to the economy. They just suck it dry. They just constantly need stuff. We got to build buildings to keep an eye on them all day and teach them things. And then at night, they come home and they just consume. They are, and then it gets worse, because as they get to be 16 or 18 or these days 20, they go out and steal jobs. They take jobs that were there in the economy away from other people. They steal the jobs. Would Dave suggest we need to ban babies? No. In fact, he is going places on libertarian stages. I happen to know this. Friends of mine have witnessed it, saying that the most important thing that you can do to save the country is go have babies. Have many of them. And you know what? We started all the way back at the beginning. It was our second episode. We talked about birth. We talked about it. We had an Acton Institute scholar using Austrian economics and biblical arguments and statistics about what was happening to world populations all over the place, showing us the demographic crisis. Dave's right on this. I wish he was as gracious to immigrants.